How to Succeed, or Stepping Stones to Fame and Fortune, by Orison Swett Marden. Chapter 11. At Once. Note the sublime precision that leads the earth over a circuit of 500,000,000 miles back to the solstice at the appointed moment without the loss of 1 second. No, not the millionth part of a second, for ages and ages which it travelled that imperial road. By Edward Everett. Dispatch is the soul of business. By Chesterfield. Unfaithfulness in the keeping of an appointment is an act of clear dishonesty. You may as well borrow a person's money as his time. By Horace Mann. By the street of By and by one arrives at the house of Never. By Cervantes. The greatest thief this world has ever produced is Procrastination, and he is still at large. By H. W. Shaw. "Oh, how I do appreciate a boy who is always on time," says H. C. Bovin. "How quickly you learn to depend on him, and how soon you find yourself entrusting him with weightier matters. The boy who has acquired a reputation for punctuality has made the first contribution to the capital that in after years makes his success a certainty." "Nothing commends a young man so much to his employers," says John Stuart Blackie, "as accuracy and punctuality in the conduct of his business. And no wonder on each man's exactitude depends the comfortable and easy going of his machine. If the clock goes fitfully, nobody knows the time of day, and if your task is a link in the chain of another man's work, you are his clock, and he ought to be able to rely on you." "The whole period of youth," says Ruskin, "is one essentially of formation, edification, instruction. There is not an hour of it but is trembling with destinies, not a moment of which, once past the appointed work, can never be done again, or the neglected blow struck on the cold iron." "To-morrow didst thou say?" asked Cotton. "Go to, I will not hear of it. To–morrow. It is a sharper who stakes his penury against thy plenty, who takes thy ready cash and pays thee naught but wishes, hopes, and promises, the currency of idiots. To–morrow! It is a period nowhere to be found in all the hoary registers of time, unless, perchance, in the fool's calendar. Wisdom disclaims the word, nor holds society with those that own it. This fancy's child, and folly is its father, wrought of such stuffs as dreams are, and baseless as the fantastic visions of the evening. Oh, how many a wreck on the road to success could say, 'I have spent all my life in the pursuit of to–morrow, being assured that to–morrow has some vast benefit or other in store for me.' I give it as my deliberate and solemn conviction," said Dr. Fitch, "that the individual who is tardy in meeting an appointment will never be respected or successful in life. If a man has no regard for the time of other men," said Horace Greeley, "why should he have for their money? What is the difference between taking a man's hour and taking his $5? There are many men to whom each hour of business day is worth more than $5. A man who keeps his time will keep his word. In truth, he cannot keep his word unless he does keep his time." When the Duchess of Sutherland came late, keeping the court waiting, the Queen, who was always vexed by tardiness, presented her with her own watch, saying, "I am afraid yours does not keep good time." "Then you must get a new watch, or I another secretary," replied Washington, when his secretary excused the lateness of his attendance by saying that his watch was too slow. "I have generally found that a man who is good at an excuse is good for nothing else," said Franklin to a servant who was always late, but always ready with an excuse. "One of the best things about school and college life is that the bell which strikes the hour for rising, for recitations, or for lectures, teaches habits of promptness. Every young man should have a watch which is a good timekeeper. One that is nearly right encourages bad habits, and is an expensive investment at any price. Wear threadbare clothes if you must, but never carry an inaccurate watch. 5 minutes behind time has ruined many a man and many a firm. He who rises late, said Fuller, must trot all day, and shall scarcely overtake his business at night. Some people are too late for everything but ruin. When a nobleman apologized to George III for being late, and said, "Better late than never," the king replied, "No, I say, better never than late." "Better late than never" is not half so good a maxim as "better never late." If Samuel Budgett was even a minute late at an appointment he would apologize. He was as punctual as a chronometer. Punctuality is contagious. Napoleon infused promptness into his officers every minute. What power there is in promptness to take the drudgery out of a disagreeable task! "A singular mischance has happened to some of our friends," said Hamilton, "at the instant when he ushered them into existence. God gave them work to do, and he also gave them a competency of time, so much that if they began at the right moment and wrought with sufficient vigor, their time and their work would end together. But a good many years ago a strange misfortune befell them. A fragment of their allotted time was lost. They cannot tell what became of it, but sure enough it has dropped out of existence. For just like two measuring lines laid alongside the one an inch shorter than the other, their work and their time run parallel. But the work is always 10 minutes in advance of the time. They are not irregular. They are never too soon. Their letters are posted the very minute after the mall is closed. They arrive at the wharf just in time to see the steamboat off. They come in sight of the terminus precisely as the station gates are closing. They do not break any engagement nor neglect any duty, but they systematically go about it too late, and usually too late by about the same fatal interval. Of Tours, the wealthy New Orleans ship owner, it is said that he was as methodical and regular as a clock, and that his neighbors were in the habit of judging of the time of the day by his movements. "How," asked the man of Sir Walter Raleigh, "do you accomplish so much and in so short a time?" "When I have anything to do, I go and do it," was the reply. The man who always acts promptly, even if he makes occasional mistakes, will succeed when a procrastinator will fail, even if he have a better judgment. When asked how he got through so much work, Lord Chesterfield replied, "Because I never put off till tomorrow what I can do today." Dewitt, Pensionary of Holland, answered the same question. Nothing is more easy. Never do but one thing at a time, and never put off until tomorrow what can be done today. Walter Scott was a very punctual man. This was the secret of his enormous achievements. He made it a rule to answer all letters the day they were received. He rose at 5. By breakfast time he had broken the neck of the day's work, as he used to say. Writing to a youth who had obtained a situation and asked him for advice, he gave this counsel: "Beware of stumbling over a propensity which easily besets you from not having your time fully employed. I mean what the women call dawdling. Do instantly whatever is to be done, and take the hours of recreation after business, never before it." Frederick the Great had a maxim: "Time is the only treasure of which it is proper to be avaricious." Leibnitz declared that the loss of an hour is a loss of a part of life. Napoleon, who knew the value of time, remarked that it was the quarter hours that won battles. The value of minutes has been often recognized, and any person watching a railway clerk handing out tickets and change during the last few minutes available must have been struck with how much he could be done in these short periods of time. At the appointed hour the train starts and by is carrying passengers at the rate of 60 miles an hour. In a second you are carried 29 yards. In 1/29th of a second you pass over 1 yard. Now 1 yard is quite an appreciable distance, but 1/29th of a second is a period which cannot be appreciated. The father of the Webster brothers, before going away to be gone for a week, gave his boys a stint to cut a field of corn, telling them that after it was done, if they had any time left, they might do what they pleased. The boys looked the field over on Monday morning and concluded they could do all the work in 3 days, so they decided to play the first 3 days. Thursday morning they went to the field, but it looked so much larger than it did on Monday morning, that they decided they could not possibly do it in 3 days, and rather than not do it all, they would not touch it. When the angry father returned, he called Ezekiel to him and asked him why they had not harvested the corn. "What have you been doing?" asked the stern father. "Nothing, father." "And what have you been doing, Daniel?" "Helping Zeki, sir." "How many boys, and men too, waste hours and days helping Zeki?" "Remember, the world was created in 6 days," said Napoleon to one of his officers. "Ask for whatever you please except time." Railroads and steamboats have been wonderful educators in promptness. No matter who is late, they live right on the minute. It is interesting to watch people at a great railroad station, running, hurrying, trying to make up time, for they well know when the time arrives the train will leave. Factories, shops, stores, banks, everything opens and closes on the minute. The higher the state of civilization, the prompter is the everything done. In countries without railroads, as in Eastern countries, everything is behind time. Everybody is indolent and lazy. The world knows that the prompt man's bills and notes will be paid on the day they were due, and will trust him. People will give him credit, for they know they can depend upon him. But lack of promptness will shake confidence almost as quickly as downright dishonesty. The man who has a habit of dawdling or listlessness will show it in everything he does. He is late at meals, late at work, dawdles on the street, loses his train, misses his appointments, and dawdles at his store until the banks are closed. Everybody he meets suffers more or less from his malady, for dawdling becomes practically a disease. "You will never find time for anything," said Charles Buxton. "If you want time you must make it." The best work we ever do is which we do now, and can never repeat. Too late is the curse of the unsuccessful who forget that one today is worth two tomorrows. Time accepts no sacrifice. It admits of neither redemption nor atonement. It is the true avenger. Your enemy may become your friend, your injurer may do you justice, but time is inexorable, and has no mercy. Then stay the present instant, dear Horatio, imprint the marks of wisdom on its wings. This of more worth than kingdoms, far more precious than all the crimson treasures of life's fountain. Oh, let it not elude thy grasp, but, like the good old patriarch upon record, hold the fleet angel fast until he bless thee. By Nathaniel Cotton. End of chapter 11.
How to Succeed, or Stepping Stones to Fame and Fortune, by Orison Swett Marden. Chapter 12. Thoroughness. Doing well depends upon doing completely. Persian proverb. He who does well will always have patrons enough. Plautus. If a man can write a better book, preach a better sermon, or make a better mousetrap than his neighbor, though he build his house in the woods, the world will make a beaten path to his door. Emerson. I hate a thing done by halves. If it be right, do it boldly. If it be wrong, leave it undone. Gilpin. No two things differ more than hurry and dispatch. Hurry is the mark of a weak mind, dispatch of a strong one. Like a turnstile, he, the weak man, is in everybody's way, but stops nobody. He talks a great deal, but says very little, looks into everything, but sees nothing, and has 100 irons in the fire, but very few of them are hot, and with those few that are, he only burns his fingers. Colton. "Make me as good a hammer as you know how," said a carpenter to the blacksmith in a New York village before the first railroad was built. "6 of us have come to work on the new church, and I've left mine at home." "As good a one as I know how?" asked David Maydole doubtfully. "But perhaps you don't want to pay for as good a one as I know how to make." "Yes, I do," said the carpenter. "I want a good hammer." It was indeed a good hammer that he received, the best, probably, that had ever been made. By means of a longer hole than usual, David had wedged the handle in its place, so that the head could not fly off, a wonderful improvement in the eyes of the carpenter, who boasted of his prize to his companions. They all came to the shop next day, and each ordered just such a hammer. When the contractor saw the tools, he ordered 2 for himself, asking that they be made a little better than those for his men. "I can't make any better ones," said Maydole. "When I make a thing, I make it as well as I can, no matter whom it is for." The storekeeper soon ordered 2 dozen, a supply unheard of in his previous business career. A New York dealer in tools came to the village to sell his wares, and bought all the storekeeper had, and left a standing order for all the blacksmith could make. David might have grown very wealthy by making goods of the standard already attained, but throughout his long and successful life he never ceased to study still further to perfect his hammers in the minutest detail. They were usually sold without any warrant of excellence, the word Maydole stamped on the head being universally considered a guarantee of the best article the world could produce. Character is power, and is the best advertisement in the world. "Yes," said he one day to the late James Parton, who told this story, "I have made hammers in this little village for 28 years." "Well," replied the great historian, "by this time you ought to make a pretty good hammer." "No, I can't," was the reply. "I can't make a pretty good hammer. I make the best hammer that's made. My only care is to make a perfect hammer. If folks don't want to pay me what they're worth, they're welcome to buy cheaper ones somewhere else. My wants are few, and I'm ready any time to go back to my blacksmith's shop, where I worked 40 years ago, before I thought of making hammers. Then I had a boy to blow my bellows. Now I have 115 men. Do you see them over there watching the heads cook over the charcoal furnace, as your cook, if she knows what she is about, watches the chops broiling? Each of them is hammered out of a piece of iron, and is tempered under the inspection of an experienced man. Every handle is seasoned 3 years, or until there is no shrink left in it. Once I thought I could use machinery in manufacturing them. Now I know that a perfect tool can't be made by machinery, and every bit of the work is done by hand. "In telling this little story," said Parton, "I have told thousands of stories. Take the word hammer out of it, and put glue in its place, and you have the history of Peter Cooper. By putting in other words, you can make the true history of every great business in the world which has lasted 30 years. "We have no secret," said manager Daniel J. Morrill of the Cambria Iron Works, employing 7,000 men at Johnstown, Pennsylvania. "We always try to beat our last batch of rails. That is all the secret we've got, and we don't care who knows it." "I don't try to see how cheap a machine I can produce, but how good a machine," said the late John C. Whiten, of Northbridge, Massachusetts, to a customer who complained of the high price of some cotton machinery. Business men soon learned what this meant, and when there was occasion to advertise any machinery for sale, New England cotton manufacturers were accustomed to state the number of years it had been in use, and add, as an all-sufficient guarantee of Northbridge products, "Whiten make." Put thoroughness into your work. It pays. "The accurate boy is always the favored one," said President Tuttle. "If a carpenter must stand at his journeyman's elbow to be sure his work is right, or if a cashier must run over his bookkeeper's columns, he might as well do the work himself as employ another to do it in that way." "Mr. Girard, can you not assist me by giving me a little work?" asked one John Smith, who had formerly worked for the great banker and attracted attention by his activity. "Assistance? Work? Ah, you want work." "Yes, sir. It's been a long time since I've had anything to do." "Very well, I shall give you some. You see dem stone yonder?" "Yes, sir." "Very well, you shall fetch and put them in this place, you see?" "Yes, sir." "And when you done, come to me at my bank." Smith finished his task, reported to Mr. Girard, and asked for more work. "Ah, oui, you want more work? Very well. You shall go place dem stone where you got him. Understand, eh? You take him back." "Yes, sir." Again Smith performed the work, and waited on Mr. Girard for payment. "Ah, you all finish?" "Yes, sir." "Very well. How much money shall I give you?" $1, sir." "That is honest. You take no advantage. There is your dollar." "Can I do anything else for you?" "Oui. Come here when you get up tomorrow. You shall have more work." Smith was punctual, but for the third time, and yet again for the fourth, he was ordered to "take dem stone back again." When he called for his pay, in the evening, Stephen Girard spoke very cordially. "Ah, Monsieur Smith, you shall be my man. You mind your business and do it. Ask no questions. You do not interfere. You got one wife?" "Yes, sir." "Ah, that is bad. One wife is bad. Any little chicks?" "Yes, sir, 5 living." "5, that is good. I like 5. I like you, Monsieur Smith. You like to work. You mind your business. Now I do something for your 5 little chicks. There. Take these 5 pieces of paper for your 5 little chicks. You shall work for them. You shall mind your own business, and your little chicks shall never want 5 more." In a few years Mr. Smith became one of the wealthiest and most respected merchants of Philadelphia. It is difficult to estimate the great influence upon a life of the early formed habit of doing everything to a finish, not leaving it half done, or pretty nearly done, but completely done. Nature finishes every little leaf, even to every little rib, its edges and stem, as exactly and perfectly as though it were the only leaf to be made that year. Even the flower that blooms in the mountain dell, where no human eye will ever behold it, is finished with the same perfection and exactness of form and outline, with the same delicate shade of color, with the same completeness of beauty, as though it was made for royalty in the Queen's garden. Perfection to the finish is a motto which every youth should adopt. "How did you attain such excellence in your profession?" was asked of Sir Joshua Reynolds. "By observing one simple rule, namely to make each picture the best," he replied. The discipline of being exact is uplifting. Progress is never more rapid than it is when we are studying to be accurate. The effort educates all the powers. Arthur Helps says, "I do not know that there is anything, except it be humility, which is so valuable as an incident of education as accuracy, and accuracy can be taught. Direct lies told to the world are as dust in the balance when weighed against the falsehoods of inaccuracy." Too many youths enter upon their business in a languid, half-hearted way, and do their work in a slipshod manner. The consequence is that they inspire neither admiration nor confidence on the part of their superiors, and cut off almost every chance of success. There is a loose, perfunctory method of doing one's work that never merits advance, and very rarely wins it. Instead of buckling to their task with all the force they possess, they merely touch it with the tips of their fingers, their rule apparently being the maximum of ease with the minimum of work. The principle of Strafford, the great minister of Charles I, is indicated by his motto, the one word, thorough. It was said of King Hezekiah, "In every work that he began, he did it with all his heart, and prospered." The stonecutter goes to work on a stone, and most patiently shapes it. He carves that bit of fern, putting all his skill and taste into it. And by the master says, "Well done," and takes it away, and gives him another block, and tells him to work on that. And so he works on that from the rising of the sun till the going down of the same, and he only knows that he is earning his bread. And he continues to put all his skill and taste into his work. He has no idea what use will be made of these few stones which he has been carving, until afterward, when one day, walking along the street, and looking up at the front of the art gallery, he sees the stones upon which he has worked. He did not know what they were for, but the architect did. And as he stands looking at his work on that structure, which is the beauty of the whole street, he says, "I am glad I did it well." And every day as he passes that way, he says to himself exultingly, "I did it well." He did not draw the design, nor plan the building, and he knew nothing of what use was to be made of his work, but he took pains in cutting those stems, and when he saw that they were part of that magnificent structure, his soul rejoiced. Work that is not finished is not work at all, it is merely a botch. We often see this defect of incompleteness in a child, which increases in youth. All about the house, everywhere, there are half-finished things. It is true that children often become tired of things which they begin with enthusiasm. But there is a great difference in children about finishing what they undertake. A boy, for instance, will start out in the morning with great enthusiasm to dig his garden over. But after a few minutes his enthusiasm has evaporated, and he wants to go fishing. He soon becomes tired of this, and thinks he will make a boat. No sooner does he get a saw and knife and a few pieces of board about him, than he makes up his mind that really what he wanted to do after all was to play ball, and this, in turn, must give way to something else. One watch, set right, will do to set many by, but, on the other hand, one that goes wrong may be the means of misleading a whole neighborhood. The same may be said of the example we individually set to those around us. "Whatever I have tried to do in life," said Dickens, "I have tried with all my heart to do well. What I have devoted myself to, I have devoted myself to completely." It is no disgrace to be a shoemaker, but it is a disgrace for a shoemaker to make bad shoes. A traveler, recently returned from Jerusalem, found, in conversation with Humboldt, that the latter was as conversant with the streets and houses of Jerusalem as he was himself. On being asked how long it was since he had visited it, the aged philosopher replied, "I have never been there, but I expected to go 60 years since, and I prepared myself." So noted for excellency was everything bearing the brand of George Washington, that a barrel of flour marked "George Washington, Mount Vernon," was exempted from the customary inspection in the West India ports. Pascal, the most wonderful mathematical genius of his time, whose work on conic sections at 16 Descartes refused to believe could be produced at that age, is considered to have fixed the French language, as Luther did the German, by his writings. None of his provincial letters, with the exception of the last 3, was more than 8 quarto pages in length. Yet he devoted 20 days to the writing of a single letter, and one of them was written no less than 13 times. The night the Tasmania was wrecked, the captain had given the course north by west, 67 degrees. He had taken account of eddies and currents. The second officer, overlooking these, had ordered the helmsman to make it north by west, 57 degrees, but to bring the ship around so gently that the captain wouldn't know it. Hence her destruction. Reverend Mr. Mailey, of the Ohio Conference of the Methodist Church, had the habit of greatly exaggerating anything he talked about. His brethren at conference told him that this habit was growing on him, and rendering him unpopular in the ministry. Mr. Mailey heard them patiently, and then said, "Brethren, I am aware of the truth of all you have said, and have shed barrels of tears over it." There is a great difference between going just right and a little wrong. End of chapter 12.
How to Succeed, or Stepping Stones to Fame and Fortune, by Orison Swett Marden. Chapter 13, Trifles. In the elder days of art, builders wrought with greatest care, each minute an unseen part, for the gods see everywhere. Longfellow. Think not a trifle, though it small appear, small sans the mountain, moments make the year, and trifles life. Young. The smallest hair throws its shadow. Goethe. He that despiseth small things shall fall little by little. Ecclesiastes. It is the little rift within the lute that by and by will make the music mute, and ever widening slowly silence all. Tennyson. A pebble in the streamlet scant has turned the course of many a river. A dewdrop on the baby plant has warped the giant oak forever. It is the close observation of little things which is the secret of success in business, in art, in science, and in every pursuit of life. Smiles. Only, but then the onlys, make up the mighty all. My rule of conduct has been that whatever is worth doing at all is worth doing well, said Nicolas Poussin, the great French painter. When asked the reason why he had become so eminent in a land of famous artists, he replied, "Because I have neglected nothing." Do little things now, says a Persian proverb, so shall big things come to thee by and by, asking to be done. God will take care of the great things if we do not neglect the little ones. A gentleman advertised for a boy to assist him in his office, and nearly 50 applicants presented themselves to him. Out of the whole number, he in a short time selected one and dismissed the rest. "I should like to know," said a friend, "on what ground you selected that boy, who had not a single recommendation." "You are mistaken," said the gentleman. "He had a great many. He wiped his feet when he came in, and closed the door after him, showing that he was careful. He gave up his seat instantly to that lame old man, showing that he was kind and thoughtful. He took off his cap when he came in, and answered my questions promptly and respectfully, showing that he was polite and gentlemanly. He picked up the book, which I had purposely laid upon the floor, and replaced it on the table, while all the rest stepped over it or shoved it aside. And he waited quietly for his turn, instead of pushing and crowding, showing that he was honest and orderly. When I talked to him, I noticed that his clothes were carefully brushed, his hair in nice order, and his teeth as white as milk. And when he wrote his name, I noticed that his fingernails were clean, instead of being tipped with jet, like that handsome little fellow's, in the blue jacket. Don't you call those letters of recommendation? I do, and I would give more for what I can tell about a boy by using my eyes 10 minutes than for all the fine letters he can bring me. Least of all seeds, greatest of all harvests, seems to be one of the great laws of nature. All life comes from microscopic beginnings. In nature there is nothing small. The microscope reveals as great a world below as the telescope above. All of nature's laws govern the smallest atoms, and a single drop of water is a miniature ocean. I cannot see that you have made any progress since my last visit, said a gentleman to Michelangelo. But, said the sculptor, I have retouched this part, polished that, softened that feature, brought out the muscle, given some expression to this lip, more energy to that limb, etc. But they are trifles, exclaimed the visitor. It may be so, replied the great artist, but trifles make perfection, and perfection is no trifle. That infinite patience which made Michelangelo spend a week in bringing out a muscle in a statue with more vital fidelity to truth, or Gerhard Dow a day in giving the right effect to a dewdrop on a cabbage leaf, makes all the difference between success and failure. Of what use is it? People ask with a sneer when Franklin told of his discovery that lightning and electricity are identical. What is the use of a child? Replied Franklin. It may become a man. In the earliest days of cotton spinning, the small fibers would stick to the bobbins and make it necessary to stop and clear the machinery. Although this loss of time reduced the earnings of the operatives, the father of Robert Peel noticed that one of his spinners always drew full pay, as his machine never stopped. "How is this, Dick?" asked Mr. Peel one day. "The onlookers tell me your bobbins are always clean." "Aye, that they be," replied Dick Ferguson. "How do you manage it, Dick?" "Why, you see, Mr. Peel," said the workman, "it is sort of a secret. If I told you, you'd be as wise as I am." "That's so," said Mr. Peel, smiling. "But I'd give you something to know. Could you make all of the looms work as smoothly as yours?" "Every one of 'em, mister," replied Dick. "Well, what shall I give you for your secret?" asked Mr. Peel, and Dick replied, "Give me a quart of ale every day, as I'm in the mills, and I'll tell thee all about it." "Agreed," said Mr. Peel, and Dick whispered very cautiously in his ear, "Chalk your bobbins." That was the whole secret, and Mr. Peel soon shot ahead of all of his competitors, for he made his machines that would chalk their own bobbins. Dick was handsomely rewarded with money instead of beer. His little idea saved the world millions of dollars. The totality of a life at any moment is the product mainly of little things, trifling choices, insignificant exercises of the will, unimportant acts often repeated, things seemingly of small account. These are the thousand tiny sculptors that are carving away constantly at the rude block of our life, giving it shape and feature. Indeed, the formation of character is much like the work of an artist in stone. The sculptor takes a rough, unshapen mass of marble, and with strong, rapid strokes of mallet and chisel, quickly brings into view the rude outline of his design. But after the outline appears, then comes hours, days, perhaps even years of patient, minute labor. A novice might see no change in the statue from one day to another, for though the chisel touches the stone 1,000 times, it touches as lightly as the fall of a raindrop, but each touch leaves a mark. The smallest thing becomes respectable when regarded as the commencement of what has advanced or is advancing into magnificence. The crude settlement of Romulus would have remained an insignificant circumstance and might have justly sunk into oblivion if Rome had not at length commanded the world. Beecher says that men, in their property, are afraid of conflagrations and lightning strokes. But if they were building a wharf in Panama, 1,000,000 madrepores, so small that only the microscope could detect them, would begin to bore the piles down under the water. There would be neither noise nor foam, but in a little while, if a child did but touch the post, over it would fall as if a saw had cut it through. Men think, with regard to their conduct, that if they were to lift themselves up gigantically and commit some crashing sin, they should never be able to hold up their heads, but they will harbor in their souls little sins, which are piercing and eating them away to inevitable ruin. Lichens, of themselves of little value, prepare the way for important vegetation. They deposit, in dying, an acid which wears away the rock and prepares the mold necessary for the nourishment of superior plants. It was but a tiny rivulet trickling down the embankment that started the terrible Johnstown flood and swept thousands into eternity. One noble heroic act has elevated a nation. Franklin's whole career was changed by a torn copy of Cotton Mather's essays to do good. Taking up a stone to throw at a turtle was the turning point in Theodore Parker's life. As he raised the stone, something within him said, "Don't do it." And he didn't. He went home and asked his mother what it was in him that said, "Don't." She told him it was conscience. Small things become great when a great soul sees them. A child, when asked why a certain tree grew crooked, answered, "Somebody trod upon it when it was a little fellow." By gnawing through a dike, even a rat may drown a nation. A little boy in Holland saw water trickling from a small hole near the bottom of a dike. He realized that the leak would rapidly become larger if the water was not checked, so he held his hand over the hole for hours on a dark and dismal night until he could attract the attention of passers-by. His name is still held in grateful remembrance in Holland. We may tell which way the wind blew before the deluge by marking the ripple and cupping of the rain in the petrified sand now preserved forever. We tell the very path by which gigantic creatures, whom man never saw, walked to the river's edge to find their food. The tears of Virgilia and Volumnia saved Rome from the Volscians, when nothing else could move the vengeful heart of Coriolanus. Not even Helen of Troy, it is said, was beautiful enough to spare the tip of her nose, and if Cleopatra's had been an inch shorter, Mark Antony would never have become infatuated with her wonderful charms, and the blemish would have changed the history of the world. Anne Boleyn's fascinating smile split the great Church of Rome in twain, and gave a nation an altered destiny. Napoleon, who feared not to attack the proudest monarchs in their capitals, shrank from the political influence of one independent woman in private life, Madame de Staël. It was a little thing for a cow to kick over a lantern left in a shanty, but it laid Chicago in ashes, and rendered homeless 100,000 people. The discovery of glass was due to a mere accident, the building of a fire on the sand. And the bayonet, first made at Bayonne in France, owes its existence to the fact that a Basque regiment, being hard-pressed by the enemy, one of the soldiers suggested that, as their ammunition was exhausted, they should fix their long knives into the barrels of their muskets, which was done, and the first bayonet charge was made. A jest led to a war between two great nations. The presence of a comma in a deed lost to the owner of an estate $5,000 a month for 8 months. The Battle of Corunna was fought and Sir John Moore's life sacrificed in 1809 through a dragoon stopping to drink while bearing dispatches. "You do no work," said the scissors to the rivet. "Where would your work be," said the rivet to the scissors, "if I didn't keep you together?" Every day is a little life, and our whole life but a day repeated. Those that dare lose a day are dangerously prodigal, those that dare misspend it desperate. What is the happiness of your life made up of? Little courtesies, little kindnesses, pleasant words, genial smiles, a friendly letter, good wishes, and good deeds. 1 in a million, once in a lifetime, may do a heroic action. We called the large majority of human lives obscure, presumptuous that we are. How know we what lives a single thought retained from the dust of nameless graves may have lighted to renown? End of chapter 13.
How to succeed or Stepping Stones to Fame and Fortune, by Orison Swett Marden. Chapter 14. Courage. Quit yourselves like men. 1 Samuel 4:9. Cowards have no luck. Elizabeth Kuhlman. He has not learned the lesson of life who does not every day surmount a fear. Emerson. To dare is better than to doubt, for doubt is always grieving. 'Tis faith that finds the riddles out. The prize is for believing. Henry Burton. Walk boldly and wisely in that light thou hast. There is a hand above will help thee on. Bailey's Festus. Have hope, though clouds environ now, and gladness hides her face in scorn. Put thou the shadow from thy brow. No night but hath its morn. Our enemies are before us, exclaimed the Spartans at Thermopylae. And we are before them, was the cool reply of Leonidas. Deliver your arms, came the message from Xerxes. Come and take them, was the answer Leonidas sent back. A Persian soldier said, you will not be able to see the sun for flying javelins and arrows. Then we will fight in the shade, replied a Lacedaemonian. What wonder that a handful of such men checked the march of the greatest host that ever trod the earth. The hero, says Emerson, is the man who is immovably centred. Darius the Great sent ambassadors to the Athenians to demand earth and water, which denoted submission. The Athenians threw them into a ditch and told them there was earth and water enough. Bring back the colours, shouted a captain at the Battle of the Alma, when an ensign maintained his ground in front, although the men were retreating. No, cried the ensign, bring up the men to the colours. To dare and again to dare, and without end to dare, was Danton's noble defiance to the enemies of France. Shakespeare says, he is not worthy of the honeycomb that shuns the hives because the bees have stings. It is a bad omen, said Eric the Red, when his horse slipped and fell on the way to his ship, moored on the coast of Greenland, in readiness for a voyage of discovery. Ill fortune would be mine should I dare venture now upon the sea. So he returned to his house, but his young son, Leif, decided to go, and with a crew of 35 men, sailed southward in search of the unknown shore upon which Captain Bjarni had been driven by a storm while sailing in another Viking ship 2 or 3 years before. The first land that they saw was probably Labrador, a barren, rugged plain. Leif called this country Helluland, or the land of flat stones. Sailing onward many days, he came to a low level coast, thickly covered with woods, on account of which he called the country Markland, probably the modern Nova Scotia. Sailing onward, they came to an island which they named Vinland, on account of the abundance of delicious wild grapes in the woods. This was in the year 1000. Here is where the city of Newport, R.I., stands. They spent many months and then returned to Greenland with their vessel loaded with grapes and strange kinds of wood. The voyage was successful, and no doubt Eric was sorry he had been frightened by the bad omen. Not every vessel that sails from Tashish will bring back the gold of Ophir, but shall it therefore rot in the harbour? No, give its sails to the wind. Men who have dared have moved the world, often before reaching the prime of life. It is astonishing what daring to begin and perseverance have enabled even youths to achieve. Alexander, who ascended the throne at 20, had conquered the whole known world before dying at 33. Julius Caesar captured 800 cities, conquered 300 nations, and defeated 3 million men, became a great orator and one of the greatest statesmen known, and still was a young man. Washington was appointed adjutant general at 19. He was sent at 21 as an ambassador to treat with the French, and won his first battle as a colonel at 22. Lafayette was made a general of the whole French army at 20. Charlemagne was a master of France and Germany at 30. Condé was only 22 when he conquered at Rocroi. Galileo was but 18 when he saw the principle of the pendulum in the swinging lamp in the cathedral at Pisa. Peel was in Parliament at 21. Gladstone was in Parliament before he was 22, and at 24 he was a Lord of the Treasury. Elizabeth Barrett Browning was proficient in Greek and Latin at 12. De Quincey at 11. Robert Browning wrote at 11 poetry of no mean order. Cowley, who sleeps in Westminster Abbey, published a volume of poems at 15. N.P. Willis won lasting fame as a poet before leaving college. Macaulay was a celebrated author before he was 23. Luther was but 29 when he nailed his famous thesis to the door of the bishop and defied the Pope. Nelson was a lieutenant in the British Navy before he was 20. He was but 47 when he received his death wound at Trafalgar. Charles XII was only 19 when he gained the Battle of Narva. At 36, Cortes was the conqueror of Mexico. At 32, Clive had established the British power in India. Hannibal, the greatest of military commanders, was only 30 when, at Cannae, he dealt an almost annihilating blow to the Republic of Rome. And Napoleon was only 27 when, on the plains of Italy, he outgeneralled and defeated, one after another, the veteran marshals of Austria. Equal courage and resolution are often shown by men who have passed the allotted time of life. Victor Hugo and Wellington were both in their prime after they had reached the age of 80 years and 10. George Bancroft wrote some of his best historical work when he was 85. Gladstone ruled England with a strong hand at 84, and was a marvel of literary and scholarly ability. Your Grace has not the organ of animal courage largely developed, said a phrenologist who was examining Wellington's head. You are right, replied the Iron Duke, and but for my sense of duty I should have retreated in my first fight. That first fight on an Indian field was one of the most terrible on record. Grant never knew when he was beaten. When told that he was surrounded by the enemy at Belmont, he quietly replied, well then, we must cut our way out. When General Jackson was a judge and was holding a court in a small settlement, a border ruffian, a murderer and a desperado came into the courtroom with brutal violence and interrupted the court. The judge ordered him to be arrested. The officer did not dare approach him. Call a posse, said the judge, and arrest him. But they also shrank with fear from the ruffian. Call me then, said Jackson. This court is adjourned for 5 minutes. He left the bench, walked straight up to the man, and with his eagle eye actually cowed the ruffian, who dropped his weapons, afterwards saying, there was something in his eye I could not resist. Lincoln never shrank from espousing an unpopular cause when he believed it to be right. At the time when it almost cost a young lawyer his bread and butter to defend the fugitive slave, and when other lawyers had refused, Lincoln would always plead the cause of the unfortunate whenever an opportunity presented. Go to Lincoln, people would say, when these bounded fugitives were seeking protection. He's not afraid of any cause if it's right. Abraham Lincoln's boyhood was one long struggle with poverty, with little education and no influential friends. When at last he had begun the practice of law, it required no little daring to cast his fortune with the weaker side in politics, and thus imperil what small reputation he had gained. Only the most sublime moral courage could have sustained him as president to hold his ground against hostile criticism and a long train of disaster, to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, support Grant and Stanton against the clamour of the politicians and the press, and through it all to do the right as God gave him to see the right. Doubt indulged becomes doubt realized. To determine to do anything is half the battle. To think a thing is impossible is to make it so. Courage is victory. Timidity is defeat. Don't waste time dreaming of obstacles you may never encounter, or in crossing bridges you have not reached. Don't fool with the nettle. Grasp with firmness if you would rob it of its sting. To half will and to hang forever in the balance is to lose your grip on life. Execute your resolutions immediately. Thoughts are but dreams till their effects be tried. Does competition trouble you? Work away. What is your competitor but a man? Conquer your place in the world, for all things serve a brave soul. Combat difficulty manfully. Sustain misfortune bravely. Endure poverty nobly. Encounter disappointment courageously. The influence of the brave man is a magnetism which creates an epidemic of noble zeal in all about him. Every day sends to the grave obscure men, who have only remained in obscurity because their timidity has prevented them from making a first effort, and who, if they could have been induced to begin, would in all probability have gone to great lengths in the career of usefulness and fame. No great deed is done, says George Eliot, by falterers who ask for certainty. A mouse that dwelt near the abode of a great magician was kept in such constant distress by its fear of a cat, that the magician, taking pity on it, turned it into a cat itself. Immediately it began to suffer from its fear of a dog, so the magician turned it into a dog. Then it began to suffer from fear of a tiger, and the magician turned it into a tiger. Then it began to suffer from its fear of huntsmen, and the magician in disgust said, "Be a mouse again. As you have only the heart of a mouse, it is impossible to help you by giving you the body of a nobler animal." And the poor creature again became a mouse. Young Commodore Oliver H. Perry, not 28 years old, was entrusted with the plan to gain control of Lake Erie. With great energy Perry directed the construction of 9 ships carrying 54 guns, and conquered Commodore Barclay, a veteran of European navies, with 6 vessels carrying 63 guns. Perry had no experience in naval battles before this. To believe a business impossible is the way to make it so. Feasible projects often miscarry through despondency, and are strangled at birth by a cowardly imagination. A ship on a lee shore stands out to sea to escape shipwreck. Shrink and you will be despised. One of Napoleon's drummer boys won the Battle of Arcola. Napoleon's little army of 14,000 men had fought 50,000 Austrians for 72 hours. The Austrians' position enabled them to sweep the bridge of Arcola, which the French had gained and which they must hold to win the battle. The drummer boy, on the shoulders of his sergeant, who swam across the river with him, beat the drum all the way across the river, and when on the opposite end of the bridge he beat his drum so vigorously that the Austrians, remembering the terrible French onslaught of the day before, fled in terror, thinking the French army was advancing upon them. Napoleon dated his great confidence in himself from this drum. The boy's heroic act was represented in stone on the front of the Pantheon of Paris. 2 days before the Battle of Jena, Napoleon said, "My lads, you must not fear death. When soldiers brave death, they drive him into the enemy's ranks." Arago says in his autobiography that when he was puzzled and discouraged with difficulties he met with in his early studies in mathematics, some words he found on the waste leaf of his textbook caught his attention and interested him. He found it to be a short letter from D'Alembert to a young person disheartened like himself, and read, "Go on, sir, go on. The difficulties you meet with will resolve themselves as you advance. Proceed, and light will dawn and shine with increasing clearness on your path." That maxim, he said, was my greatest master in mathematics. Overtaken near a rocky coast by a sudden storm of great violence, the captain of a French brig gave orders to put out to sea, but in spite of all the efforts of the crew they could not steer clear of the rocks, and after struggling for a whole day they felt a violent shock accompanied by a horrible crash. The boats were lowered, but only to be swept away by the waves. As a last resort the captain proposed that some sailors should swim ashore with a rope, but not a man would volunteer. "Captain," said the 12-year-old little cabin boy Jacques timidly, "you don't wish to expose the lives of good sailors like these. It does not matter what becomes of a little cabin boy. Give me a ball of strong string which will unroll as I go on. Fasten one end around my body, and I promise you that within an hour the rope shall be well fastened to the shore, or I will perish in the attempt." Before anyone could stop him, he leapt overboard. His head was soon seen like a black point rising above the waves, and then it disappeared in the distance and mist, and but for the occasional pull upon the ball of cord, all would have thought him dead. At length it fell as if slackened, and the sailors looked at one another in silence, when a quick violent pull, followed by a second and a third, told that Jacques had reached the shore. A strong rope was fastened to the cord and pulled to the shore, and by its aid many of the sailors were rescued. In 1833 Miss Prudence Crandall, a Quaker schoolmistress of Canterbury, Con, opened her school to negro children as well as to whites. The whole place was thrown into an uproar. Town meetings were called to denounce her. The most vindictive and inhuman measures were taken to isolate the school from the support of the townspeople. Stores and churches were closed against teacher and pupils. Public conveyances were denied them. Physicians would not attend them. Miss Crandall's own friends dared not visit her. The house was assailed with rotten eggs and stones and finally set on fire. Yet the cause was righteous, and the opposition proved vain and fruitless. Public opinion is often radically wrong. Staunch old Admiral Farragut, he of the true heart and the iron will, said to another officer of the Navy, "Dupont, do you know why you didn't get into Charleston with your ironclads?" "Oh, was it because the channel was so crooked?" "No, Dupont, it was not that." "Well, the rebel fire was perfectly horrible." "Yes, but it wasn't that." "Well, what was it then?" "It was because you didn't believe you could go in." I have tried Lord Howe on most important occasions. He never asked me how he was to execute any service entrusted to his charge, but always went straight forward and did it. So answered Sir Edward Hawke, when his appointment of Howe for some peculiarly responsible duty was criticised on the ground that Howe was the junior admiral in the fleet. There is a tradition among the Indians that Manitou was travelling in the invisible world, and came upon a hedge of thorns, then saw wild beasts glare upon him from the thicket, and after a while stood before an impassable river. As he determined to proceed, the thorns turned out phantoms, the wild beasts powerless ghosts, and the river only a shadow. When we march on, obstacles disappear. Many distinguished foreign and American statesmen were present at a fashionable dinner party where wine was freely poured. But Schuyler Colfax, then Vice President of the United States, declined to drink from the proffered cup. "Colfax does not drink?" sneered a senator who had already taken too much. "You are right," said the Vice President. "I dare not." A Western party recently invited the surviving Union and Confederate officers to give account of the bravest act observed by each during the Civil War. Colonel Thomas W. Higginson said that at a dinner at Beaufort, S.C., where wine flowed freely and ribald jests were bandied, Dr. Minor, a slight boyish fellow who did not drink, was told that he could not go until he had drunk a toast, told a story, or sung a song. He replied, "I cannot sing, but I will give a toast, although I must drink it in water. It is Our Mothers." The men were so affected and ashamed that some took him by the hand and thanked him for displaying courage greater than that required to walk up to the mouth of a cannon. When Grant was in Houston several years ago, he was given a rousing reception. Naturally hospitable and naturally inclined to like a man of Grant's make-up, the Houstonites determined to go beyond any other southern city in the way of a banquet and other manifestations of their goodwill and hospitality. They made great preparations for the dinner, the committee taking great pains to have the finest wines that could be procured for the table at night. When the time came to serve the wine, the head waiter first went to Grant. Without a word, the general quietly turned down all the glasses at his plate. This movement was a great surprise to the Texans, but they were equal to the occasion. Without a single word being spoken, every man along the line of the long tables turned his glasses down, and there was not a drop of wine taken that night. Don't be like Uriah Heep, begging everybody's pardon for taking the liberty of being in the world. There is nothing attractive in timidity, nothing lovable in fear. Both are deformities and are repulsive. Manly courage is dignified and graceful. The worst manners in the world are those of persons conscious of being beneath their position and trying to conceal it or make up for it by style. It takes courage for a young man to stand firmly erect while others are bowing and fawning for praise and power. It takes courage to wear threadbare clothes while your comrades dress in broadcloth. It takes courage to remain in honest poverty when others grow rich by fraud. It takes courage to say no squarely when those around you say yes. It takes courage to do your duty in silence and obscurity while others prosper and grow famous, although neglecting sacred obligations. It takes courage to unmask your true self, to show your blemishes to a condemning world, and to pass for what you really are. End of chapter 14.
How to Succeed, or Stepping Stones to Fame and Fortune, by Orison Swett Marden. Chapter 15. Willpower. In the moral world there is nothing impossible if we can bring a thorough will to do it. Wilhelm von Humboldt. It is firmness that makes the gods on our side. Voltaire. Stand firm, don't flutter. Franklin. People do not lack strength, they lack will. Victor Hugo. Perpetual pushing and assurance put a difficulty out of countenance and make a seeming difficulty give way. Jeremy Collier. When a firm, decisive spirit is recognized, it is curious to see how the space clears around a man and leaves him room and freedom. John Foster. Do you know, asked Balzac's father, that in literature a man must be either a king or a beggar? Very well, replied his son, I will be a king. After 10 years of struggle with hardship and poverty, he won success as an author. Why do you repair that magistrate's bench with such great care? Asked a bystander of a carpenter who was taking unusual pains. Because I wish to make it easy against the time when I come to sit on it myself, replied the other. He did sit on that bench as a magistrate a few years later. I will be a Marshal of France and a great general, exclaimed a young French officer as he paced the room with hands tightly clenched. He became a successful general and a Marshal of France. There is so much power in faith, says Bulwer, even when faith is applied but to things human and earthly, that let a man but be firmly persuaded that he is born to do some day what at the moment seems impossible, and it is 50 to 1 but what he does it before he dies. There is about as much chance of idleness and incapacity winning real success, or a high position in life, as there would be in producing a Paradise Lost by shaking up promiscuously the separate words of Webster's dictionary and letting them fall at random on the floor. Fortune smiles upon those who roll up their sleeves and put their shoulders to the wheel, upon men who are not afraid of dreary, dry, irksome drudgery, men of nerve and grit who do not turn aside for dirt and detail. Is there one whom difficulties dishearten? Asked John Hunter. He will do little. Is there one who will conquer? That kind of man never fails. Circumstances, says Milton, have rarely favored famous men. They have fought their way to triumph through all sorts of opposing obstacles. We have a half-belief, said Emerson, that the person is possible who can counterpoise all other persons. We believe that there may be a man who is a match for events, one who never found his match, against whom other men being dashed are broken, one who can give you any odds and beat you. The simple truth is that a will strong enough to keep a man continually striving for things not wholly beyond his powers will carry him in time very far toward his chosen goal. At 19, Bayard Taylor walked to Philadelphia, 30 miles, to find a publisher for 15 of his poems. He wanted to see them printed in a book, but no publisher would undertake it. He returned to his home whistling, however, showing that his courage and resolution had not abated. In Europe he was often forced to live on 20 cents a day for weeks on account of his poverty. He returned to London with only 30 cents left. He tried to sell a poem of 1,200 lines, which he had in his knapsack, but no publisher wanted it. Of that time he wrote, "My situation was about as hopeless as it is possible to conceive." But his will defied circumstances, and he rose above them. For 2 years he lived on $250 a year in London, earning every dollar of it with his pen. His untimely death in 1879, at 54, when minister to Berlin, was lamented by the learned and great of all countries. We are told of a young New York inventor who about 20 years ago spent every dollar he was worth in an experiment which, if successful, would introduce his invention to public notice and ensure his fortune and, what he valued more, his usefulness. The next morning the daily papers heaped unsparing ridicule upon him. Hope for the future seemed vain. He looked around the shabby room where his wife, a delicate little woman, was preparing breakfast. He was without a penny. He seemed like a fool in his own eyes. All these years of hard work were wasted. He went into his chamber, sat down, and buried his face in his hands. At length, with a fiery heat flashing through his body, he stood erect. "It shall succeed," he said, shutting his teeth. His wife was crying over the papers when he went back. "They are very cruel," she said. "They don't understand." "I'll make them understand," he replied cheerfully. "It was a fight for 6 years," he said afterward. "Poverty, sickness, and contempt followed me. I had nothing left but the dogged determination that it should succeed." It did succeed. The invention was a great and useful one. The inventor is now a prosperous and happy man. Napoleon was a terrible example of what the power of will can accomplish. He always threw his whole force of body and mind direct upon his work. Imbecile rulers and the nations they governed went down before him in succession. He was told that the Alps stood in the way of his armies. "There shall be no Alps," he said, and the road across the Simplon was constructed, through a district formerly almost inaccessible. "Impossible," said he, "is a word only to be found in the dictionary of fools." He was a man who toiled terribly, sometimes employing and exhausting 4 secretaries at a time. He spared no one, not even himself. His influence inspired other men, and put a new life into them. "I made my generals out of mud," he said. To think we are able is almost to be so. To determine upon attainment is frequently attainment itself. Thus earnest resolution has often seemed to have about it almost a savor of omnipotence. The strength of Suwarrow's character lay in his power of willing, and like most resolute persons, he preached it up as a system. Before Pizarro, d'Almagro, and De Luc obtained any associates, or arms, or soldiers, and with a very imperfect knowledge of the country or the powers they were to encounter, they celebrated a solemn mass in one of the great churches, dedicating themselves to the conquest of Peru. The people expressed their contempt at such a monstrous project, and were shocked at such sacrilege. But these decided men continued the service, and afterward retired for their great preparation, with an entire insensibility to the expressions of contempt. Their firmness was absolutely invincible. The world has deplored the results of this expedition, but there is a great lesson for us in the firmness of decision of its leaders. Such firmness would keep to its course, and retain its purpose unshaken amidst the ruins of the world. At the Battle of Marengo, the French army was supposed to be defeated, but while Bonaparte and his staff were considering their next move, Desailly suggested that there was yet time to retrieve their disaster, as it was only about the middle of the afternoon. Napoleon rallied his men, renewed the fight, and won a great victory over the Austrians, though the unfortunate Desailly lost his own life in that field. What has chance ever done in the world? Has it built any cities? Has it invented any telephones, any telegraphs? Has it built any steamships, established any universities, any asylums, any hospitals? Was there any chance in Caesar's crossing the Rubicon? What had chance to do with Napoleon's career, with Wellington's, or Grant's, or von Moltke's? Every battle was won before it was begun. What had luck to do with Thermopylae, Trafalgar, Gettysburg? Our successes we ascribe to ourselves, our failures to destiny. A vacillating man, no matter what his abilities, is invariably pushed to the wall in the race of life by a determined will. It is he who resolves to succeed, and who at every fresh rebuff begins resolutely again, that reaches the goal. The shores of fortune are covered with the stranded wrecks of men of brilliant ability, but who have wanted courage, faith, and decision, and have therefore perished in sight of more resolute but less capable adventurers who succeeded in making port. Hundreds of men go to their graves in obscurity, who have been obscure only because they lacked the pluck to make a first effort, and who, could they only have resolved to begin, would have astonished the world by their achievements and successes. The fact is, as Sidney Smith has well said, that in order to do anything in this world that is worth doing, we must not stand shivering on the bank and thinking of the cold and the danger, but jump in and scramble through as well as we can. Is this not a grand privilege of man, immortal man, that though he may not be able to stir a finger, that though a moth may crush him, that merely by a righteous will he is raised above the stars, that by it he originates a good in the universe which the universe could not annihilate, a good which can defy extinction, though all created energies of intelligence or matter were combined against it. A man whose moral nature is ascendant is not the subject, but the superior of circumstances. He is free, nay, more, he is a king. And though this sovereignty may have been won by many desperate battles, once on the throne, and holding the scepter with a firm grasp, he has a royalty of which neither time nor accident can strip him. What can you do with a man who has an invincible purpose in him, who never knows when he is beaten, and who, when his legs are shot off, will fight on the stumps? Difficulties and opposition do not daunt him. He thrives on persecution. It only stimulates him to more determined endeavor. Give a man the alphabet and an iron will, and who shall place bounds to his achievements? Imprison a Galileo for his discoveries in science, and he will experiment with the straw in his cell. Deprive Euler of his eyesight, and he but studies harder upon mental problems, thus developing marvelous powers of mathematical calculation. Lock up the poor Bedford tinker in jail, and he will write the finest allegory in the world, or will leave his imperishable thoughts upon the walls of his cell. Burn the body of Wycliffe and throw the ashes into the Severn, but they will be swept to the ocean, which will carry them, permeated with his principles, to all lands. The world always listens to a man with a will in him. You might as well snub the sun, as such men as Bismarck and Grant. Hope would storm the castle of despair. It gives courage when despondency would give up the battle of life. He is the best doctor who can implant hope and courage in the human soul. So he is the greatest man who can inspire us to the grandest achievements. Our remedies oft in ourselves do lie, which we ascribe to heaven. The fated sky gives us free scope, and only backward pulls our slow designs when we ourselves are dull. How much I could do if I only tried. End of chapter 15.